Welcome back, Goofy Goobers, to Sponge Lore. My name is Eric, and today we will be taking a deep look at SpongeBob SquarePants Season 1, Episode 1A, better known as Help Wanted. Before we get into the meat of this episode, let's start off with some of the, what I like to call, logistics of the episode. Help Wanted first aired in America on May 1st, 1999. The episode runs for 8 minutes and 16 seconds, which is rather short compared to what I have deemed the 11-minute rule. You see, in SpongeBob, there are many references in the episodes to 11 minutes. This is a joke off of each episode running for approximately 11 minutes. Now, 8 minutes compared to 11 minutes is obviously short, and now the phrase 11 minutes just sounds weird. Because of the shortage of time, this episode has 2 sister episodes instead of the typical 1. For those of you who don't know, a sister episode is a separate cartoon that airs alongside another cartoon to make one full episode. The sister episodes for Help Wanted are Reef Blower and Tea at the Tree Dome. In terms of chronology of the show, this is obviously the first episode, or pilot, so there is no previous episode. There is a next episode, though, which is Reef Blower. Now let's talk about characters. This is a unique episode in that every character involved is a new character. The first character to ever appear in SpongeBob is the French narrator, whose voice is often heard, but whose body is rarely seen. Up next we have our favorite undersea sponge, Mr. SquarePants himself. At the start of the episode, the French narrator introduces him to us as one of his favorite creatures, and reassures us that yes, he lives in a pineapple. Shortly after meeting SpongeBob, we are briefly introduced to his 2 pets, the series staple Gary the Snail and Shelly. Who's Shelly? You see that bird cage hanging from the ceiling with the scallop in it? Yep, that's an actual character with over 3 dozen appearances. On SpongeBob's way to the Krusty Krab, we are briefly introduced to his best friend Patrick Star. Then at the Krusty Krab, we meet the Krusty crew, Mr. Eugene Krabs, and Squidward Tentacles. We also see, or rather hear, a bus driver, and meet the Anchovies, one of the more annoying groups in Bikini Bottom. The episode also briefly mentions Mr. Krabs' mother, or Betsy Krabs. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's dive into this cartoon. It starts off rather simply, just the French narrator talking about the sea, describing it as fascinating and wonderful. There's a peaceful music as he introduces us to the setting of the show, Bikini Bottom. He says that this is home to one of his favorite creatures, being SpongeBob SquarePants. Before creating, writing, and producing this show, Steven Hillenburg was a marine biologist, so he used such words as fascinating, wonderful, and favorite to describe the creatures and places which he loved, under the sea. We see a shot of Conch Street, where SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick live. Only the houses on this street don't look much like houses. There's a pineapple, a monument, and a rock. The French narrator even acknowledges the strangeness when he has to confirm to us that SpongeBob does in fact live in a pineapple. This introduces a concept to the show which we see in almost every episode, how everything in Bikini Bottom is just stuff that floated down from the surface, and they will take anything they get. If they need to use a fruit or a monument or a muffler as a house, they will. This concept is further explored in universe in other episodes, particularly in High Sea Diving, but for now it sufficeth to say that these sea creatures don't do a whole lot of building on their own. Here we are introduced to SpongeBob and his iconic foghorn alarm. From this scene we can conclude that our sponge is quite the deep sleeper, seeing that it took him 4 blasts from the alarm to wake him up. Plus add in that he is preparing for a long-awaited and potentially stressful day, so he would not be sleeping as well as he usually does. We can also see that he keeps a diving board right next to his bed, and we see him naked within the first minute of the show. I won't go any deeper into these as I want to save them for SpongeBob's character analysis, but they are worth at least mentioning here. We can see SpongeBob easily getting dressed. All he does is land on his clothes and he's ready to go. This contrasts with other sequences of him getting ready for the day, though. In the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, we can see him folding his square pants like a cardboard box, which didn't stay very well. We do, however, see some consistency in that he sleeps with his shoes on, which was one of the secrets he tells Patrick in the secret box. Next, we see a scene of SpongeBob quote-unquote working out. He has a barbell where on the ends, instead of regular weights, he has placed a stuffed bear and rabbit. Now, this could be interpreted as SpongeBob actually being very strong. You see, SpongeBob weighs 1 ounce, and my Gary the Snail plush weighs 4.9 ounces. Multiply that by 2 plus the bar itself, and he's lifting 10 times his weight. However, this line of thinking does not quite add up, since the stuffed animals SpongeBob is using are clearly smaller than him. These stuffed animals are sized down to where they would feel to SpongeBob the same way that our teddy bears would feel to us. This isn't to say that he's not ambitious, though. He's clearly giving his all here and even has an I Heart Pain banner, so you know he's committed. He also has a set of rings and whatever this ball is supposed to be. We can see that he is weak now, but he clearly wants to improve himself. Next, we see SpongeBob running down the street, repeating his catchphrase, "I'm ready." We see some more muffler houses, and SpongeBob actually leaves his front door open. This could be for one of two reasons. Either he's an idiot, or the neighborhood is very safe. But quite frankly, it's probably both. SpongeBob runs past a rock, which is actually the residence of Patrick Star, SpongeBob's best friend. His introduction is short but effective. His line is "Go SpongeBob," which shows us right off the bat that he's a loyal friend. Patrick probably already knows where SpongeBob is going and is happy that he's going to fulfill his dream. Patrick then falls off his rock, which is where we start to see his character as a clumsy ignoramus. Up next is a shot of SpongeBob praising the Krusty Krab. He thinks very highly of it, but we can see that his view on it is off. We can see that it's just a greasy spoon made out of a lobster trap. We can see it cough out smoke, and later it's shown that there's graffiti right on the front door. SpongeBob hypes himself up to ask for the job, but then backs out shortly after. He explains to Patrick that it's because he isn't good enough. He's further showing how highly he thinks of the establishment, but also letting us glimpse at something else. Something we don't see from SpongeBob very often. His self-doubt. Later in the episode, he will face not one but two seemingly impossible tasks, but his biggest challenge doesn't present itself in finding a spatula that doesn't exist or making food he's never prepared before for countless anchovies. His greatest task is just asking for the job. Thomas C. Foster wrote that every trip is a quest, and this is certainly true here. SpongeBob sets out to the Krusty Krab. He has some struggles along the way. He has to get ready and struggle through his workout. He goes there with the stated purpose of obtaining employment, but his true reason for going is to conquer himself. Of course, SpongeBob is not alone in this. Here, Patrick makes his second appearance and helps SpongeBob. He reminds him that his first words were, "May I take your order?" implying that he was born to work in food service. He also said that SpongeBob made a spatula in woodshop, which is intended to remind him that this is his lifelong dream and to stop him from giving up on it. Patrick then tries his hardest to think of another reason that SpongeBob is the one for a job. But thinking isn't quite his strong suit, so he settles on saying that he's a big yellow cube with holes. This is clearly played for comedy, and I'll say it really works. Finally, Patrick uses SpongeBob's own catchphrase against him, convincing him once and for all that he is ready to fulfill his dream. As he runs to the front door of the Krusty Krab, Squidward sees him and wonders why he is there. We, the audience, know that he is there to get a job, making this a brief moment of dramatic irony, but it is short-lived due to Squidward getting his answer almost immediately. They could have done so much more with this plot point, but in the end they did not, which makes this seem like a bit of a throwaway shot. So why would they include this? Well, this is actually a genius introduction to the character of Squidward Tentacles. Any good fast food employee, especially one that is scheduled 6 days every week, would notice if their crew was short an essential position. Even if Mr. Krabs and Squidward are enough to run the Krusty Krab efficiently, they're the only two that work there, so Krabs would have at least mentioned to Squidward that he was going to hire another hand. So why does any of this matter? Well, because it shows us right off the bat that Squidward doesn't pay attention to or care about his work. He cares so little that he doesn't see the help wanted sign that's 2 feet from his face. Squidward desperately rushes to Mr. Krabs to have a conversation that he could have had much earlier. As we know, Squidward is SpongeBob's neighbor. We also know that SpongeBob has a hard time keeping to himself. If Squidward had paid attention over the years, he would likely have known about SpongeBob's lifelong dream to become a fry cook. In fact, we can see by Squidward's reaction to the help wanted sign that he did know. If he then paid attention to the hiring status of the Krusty Krab, he would have been able to tell Mr. Krabs about SpongeBob well before this urgent moment. Luckily for Squidward, with SpongeBob's slapstick entrance, Squidward's one-word testimony, and his intuition, Mr. Krabs decides that he will not hire SpongeBob. But either out of charity or selfishness, likely the latter, he will not tell SpongeBob to his face. So he has to think of a way to get SpongeBob out of the Krusty Krab for good. His solution is to make SpongeBob go on an impossible search for a particular spatula which does not exist. SpongeBob, being naive, takes the bait and begins his search immediately. Mr. Krabs and Squidward then celebrate, thinking that they have rid themselves of SpongeBob. However, Mr. Krabs has made a widely unnoticed mistake. This is the Krusty Crew hat, described by SpongeBob as a symbol of his employment. It can only be worn by proven members of the Krusty Crew. In the episode No Hat for Pat, even though he was employed by the Krusty Krab, Patrick was not given this hat until he had earned it. So, by this logic, Mr. Krabs would not give SpongeBob the hat until after he was hired. However, Mr. Krabs gives SpongeBob the hat to wear on his search for the spatula. According to the show's own rules, and through Krabs' careless actions, SpongeBob is already a part of the Krusty Crew, even though they don't realize it. After SpongeBob is sent off on his journey, Mr. Krabs smells a kind of smelly smell that smells smelly, which of course turns out to be multiple buses full of anchovies. This is actually showing us that Krabs has a keen sense of smell, which is rarely mentioned again in the show. The next minute or so of the cartoon is rather straightforward and mostly just played for laughs. It switches back and forth between the Krusty Krab in shambles and SpongeBob shopping peacefully. At the end of this sequence, we see Mr. Krabs and Squidward accept that this will be the end of the Krusty Krab, and of them. But then, SpongeBob literally flies in with the required spatula. He saves the Krusty Krab along with Mr. Krabs and Squidward by performing the finest fast foodsmanship Mr. Krabs had ever seen. But how? The Krabby Patty formula is a secret, so SpongeBob has clearly never made one before. It is possible that what SpongeBob made were not traditional Krabby Patties. Perhaps Mr. Krabs didn't just gain a new employee, but a new formula as well, or at least some changes to the current formula. It does appear that SpongeBob uses the same technique as he does in other episodes to make Krabby Patties, though we likely never truly know what he made in this episode. After this, Mr. Krabs is impressed enough to hire him officially and give him a name tag to go along with the hat. Squidward tries to protest this, but Mr. Krabs pays no attention, being too focused on the money that SpongeBob brought in. Mr. Krabs then initiates the 3 cheers, which occurs in many other episodes. The last we see of Mr. Krabs in this episode is him going to his office to count his money. This is the first time we really see the greediness of Mr. Krabs, which becomes very prominent in his character very quickly. The episode ends with Patrick appearing one more time. He orders 1 Krabby Patty, but SpongeBob proceeds to make dozens and throw them at him as Squidward calls for Mr. Krabs. Patrick is likely here not only because he likes the food, but also to see his best friend at his new job. SpongeBob obviously makes so many Krabby Patties because that's the only thing he knows. That's gonna do it for this analysis of Help Wanted. A lot of research went into this to make it as accurate as possible. Subscribe to be a goofy goober, like and share the video if you enjoyed, and leave a comment saying what you want me to talk about next. Until next time, stay spongy.